Thank you very much, Torsten. Well, this will be a hard act to follow. I'll be less entertaining, slightly boring, down to earth, but hopefully I will end on a more optimistic note, and that will still help you to bear with me for the next half hour. So I'll walk you through the ingredients of the bizarre situation we find ourselves in, rising inequality, mixed with austerity and financialization. So that's the current policy mix. Unsurprisingly, that has led to secular demand deficiency, a secular slowdown in accumulation, and stagnation in productivity. But there is an alternative, and that will be what I will try to present, focusing on wage policies targeting an equality-led development. And I use the phrase development as opposed to growth because that is eventually the target of human civilizations, mixed with a fiscal policy particularly focusing on public investment. I will not be able to say much on monetary policy, but that will be hopefully the church paper by Andy, who will extend more on the monetary policy dimension. So where are we today? I suspect it's fair to say that that's now the third phase of the Great Recession. Has been put forward more recently by Andy Haldane, the chief economist of Bank of England, among others. We are sitting on an emerging market bubble, which is about to bust, which had been fueled by capital flows from the rest of the world, thanks to cheap central bank lending in the core. The growth in these emerging markets has basically supplied 80% of the growth in the global economy after the 2008-2009 recession. And China, as well as other major emerging economies from Latin America to Russia to Asia, are now finding it very difficult to continue to be the locomotive of growth of the advanced capitalist countries of G7. Now, in the meantime, G7 countries have done very little to change the fundamental flows of their economic growth model, which have been at the very root of the Great Recession to begin with. And they find themselves in this vicious circle of chronically low demand, low accumulation, low growth, and either fewer or high numbers of bad quality jobs, or a combination of actually both in the worst case scenarios. And what we see is a recovery in profits and before the recession, a secular rise in profits. But despite this high profitability, private investments remained very weak in the advanced economies in particular, and firms have directed their profits to financial speculation, financial activities. So the combination of financialization on the one hand, which has been an ongoing research topic of this research community here, wage restraint and rising inequality on the other hand, which is another major research focus of scholars who have been contributing to this conference, have been and are continuing to be and will be, sadly, the major brakes against growth unless we manage to reverse that. So this is one picture slightly looking different than it was looking on my own desktop, but hopefully you will still be able to see the big picture of rising inequality and stagnation. We have the US and EU 15, the first figure for the US, the story of rising inequality, rising profit share, falling wage share, and growth. Data from 1960s to 2015 being the forecast. So what you have there is the fall in the profit share, the fall in the wage share, starting from somewhere particularly mid-70s, late 70s onwards. And what has been very interesting, particularly in this recession in the US, is even during the recession, the wage share continued to fall, apart from a very minor recovery only in the very last year in 2015. So wage share is usually a counter-cyclical variable. When productivity plummets during a recession, the share of wage income in GDP moves counter to the business cycle. And this recession has proved to be one major difference to the usual trends we know from advanced capitalist countries in terms of distribution. Now, along with the fall in the wage share, growth, that's the red line, have been more volatile and on average has been lower in the post-1980s. The story is very similar in the EU15. With one difference, the secular decline in the wage share is even more pronounced in the EU, the advanced capitalist countries of the EU, simply because the wage data in the US incorporates, obviously, the top 1% wage income, which are the CEO managerial wages, and this is making the picture of the wage share look a bit less depressing than the situation in the EU15. But the link, the impact of that on growth is equally depressing in the US as well as in the EU15. So where does that leave us? This is how Financial Times had described the two pictures I have shown you, referring to an earlier work that we had done for the International Labour Office, which we have presented in some earlier years in this conference. Capital gobbles labor's share, but victory is empty. And in another earlier piece in the Financial Times again, which sadly wasn't informed by our research back in 2011, another journalist was putting exactly the story I have been talking about the US to you in the previous graph, the decline in the labor's share in the recession in the US as the biggest threat to recovery, because the decline in the labor share, along with a shift of labor income towards higher earners, may be an important part of why the US economic recovery is so sluggish, wrote Robin Harding. Workers on lower wages consume much of their income, while higher wage earners and those with capital income are more likely to save. No reference to Kaletsky, no reference to Kazimierz Lasky, no reference to Amit Bhadouri or any of the work that is being done in this research community, but he has understood the point, and I think this is one of the most important ingredients. I'll briefly walk you through of the empirical results that we have been working from this research piece for the International Labour Office, as well as earlier work that we have been doing with other colleagues, and the more recent work that we have presented in an earlier session this year, which was presented by Thomas Obst, who is also here in the audience. We looked at G20 countries, what happens to growth when wage share falls. We looked at each member state of the EU15. We looked at what happens to consumption, to private investment, to price formation and exports and imports, the national multiplier, impacts integrated, and most importantly, we tried to bring together what happens when everyone is implementing this race to the bottom policies in labor's share. How do these global interactions, in particular, lead to an amplified fallacy of composition, because it's not just the US dumping wages, but it's doing it along with Mexico, Canada, European Union, Japan, India, and China. So then, of course, the relative competitiveness positions of these countries aren't changing much. Once you build in the changes in your trade partners' export prices and hence your import prices, when everybody is doing wage moderation, meaning keeping labor costs increasing at a pace below productivity. Of course, this is not really making much of an impact in terms of your export performance. Similarly, changes in income distribution will have an impact on the domestic demand of your trade partners, and that will have consequences for your export performance as well. So the work we did with Yorgos Galanis, who is also in the audience here somewhere, and Thomas Obst for basically about 30 countries shows, first of all, if you look at just the domestic demand, meaning consumption of households, private investment of domestic firms, altogether summed up, this will contract if you squeeze the share of labor in national income. That's a surprisingly robust income. It is consistent with some other research that have been done with other colleagues such as Eckertine here, Engelbert Stockhammer, Nastepat and Stefan Ederer on several different countries using slightly different methodologies, very robust finding in the literature, and all of this literature on distribution-driven demand-led growth models. So, if domestic demand is largely driven by wages, then in large economies, which are by definition relatively closed, where export markets, although are big in absolute volumes, are a smaller part of the total demand of the economy, the results simply indicate that economies are wage-led, meaning a rise in inequality will squeeze growth rates, will lead to stagnation. On a positive note, if you could reverse that, if you could increase the share of labor, if you could opt for a more egalitarian growth policy, that could have some positive growth impact. Or if you want to be very cautious and very suspicious of econometrics, I think there is still enough ammunition in the research to give you the comfort, the confidence to say egalitarian policies will not harm the long-term growth potential of our economies. So we can do them not maybe for the sake of achieving very high stimulus to growth, but for their own sake, and we would be safe. It won't generate barriers, impediments to growth. Now, this is surely the case for large areas such as the European Union as a whole. It's the case for the US, it is the case for Japan, and there are some developing country cases we had looked at with Yorgos Galanis, such as Turkey and Korea. Well, it is also the case for them. Now, you would also find, of course, individual countries, particularly the small, very open countries, as in the work we have done with Thomas Obst, like the case of Austria, like the case of Ireland. Again, Stefan Ederer and Engelbert Stockhammer have also looked at the case of Austria. Results seem to be robust across different studies. These countries in isolation look like as if they are profit-led, meaning if they were the only genius countries in the world who are dumping their labor shares, they could grow out of that. Sadly, they are not the only genuine capitalists, the Austrian or the Irish capitalists. They are implementing the same policies as being good students of the European Commission, although these are just directives. It's not written into law, but it's so well coordinated across Europe that they're doing wage moderation along with Germany, along with the UK, along with France, Italy, and so on. When this is the case, what we find is everyone leaves the markets with empty hands, or actually worse, all of them contract simultaneously. Austria, Ireland, who seem to have a competitive edge when they dump their labor share, as long as they are the only countries doing it in the world, who could grow out of that, all of a sudden starts contracting. Of course, this is very consistent with also the stylized facts. Maybe you needn't do the econometrics, but we are still hoping we can convince the Brussels policymakers more if we blur their minds with matrices and equations coming out of econometric estimations. What we tried to do was to look at this coordinated negative impact of the race to the bottom from the research on the G20 countries, what we find is if there is a global race to the bottom in labor share of just a mere 1 percentage point of national income of all the G20 countries, I dare to call it global because it's 85% of global GDP, this global GDP would fall by 0.36%. Mind you, wage shares didn't fall by 1%. They have fallen in the European Union by about 11 percentage points, in the US by about 8 percentage points, in the developing world by quite substantially more. So multiply this impact, you get economically a quite significant negative impact on global income. At the EU level, the finding is a simultaneous fall in the wage shares, suppressing EU 15's GDP by about 0.3%. Quite substantial. On a positive note, if you could reverse that, if we could coordinate our policies, and that's why I suppose we are meeting, say, in G20 meetings every year, if we could do that, and through a gradual transition, go back to equality levels of the late 70s. That's what we have simulated, at least in the Peace for the International Labour Office. We could have a scenario where global GDP would increase by more than 3%, in which each country, including China, a very otherwise profit-led country, could still grow. And EU would be one of the major beneficiaries of that with a growth boost of 2.4%. So there is obviously a very simple fallacy of composition behind this. What works for one firm doesn't work at the nation level. What could work for one individual country, a small country, wouldn't work when all countries do the same. The way we tried to make it funny was to say that planet Earth is wage-led because we are not trading with Mars. And I believe one day we will start trading with Mars, but as long as we don't do it, we are wage-led in aggregate. So what we should be doing is to put our act together and coordinate. And if we want recovery, well, that needs a pay rise. Now, often when I say that, still, and I sometimes entertain investment fund managers. My recent audience was the high-ranking military officers about the colonel rank in a one-year program at the Royal College of Defence Studies in London. They gather the point. If you haven't studied economics, it's a lot easier for you to be convinced with some common sense. Present company excluded, I meant neoclassical economists. But then they still say, but in the age of globalization, how are you going to do that? The whole point we have here is actually globalization puts a limit to what you can do in terms of trying to gain a competitive edge by wage moderation, because we are living in a highly integrated global economy. And globalization isn't just about economic globalization. It's not just about you are trading, you have a high share of exports and imports. It's also about political globalization. What I do is being coordinated by the IMF, by the World Bank, or by the European Commission. There's a contagion effect of policies, and sadly the contagion effect is working in favor of the bad policies of race to the bottom in labor's share. But this is the beauty of globalization as well. When everyone is doing the same, no one is benefiting from that. It's a very limited visual thinking of neoliberalism. International competitiveness effects are pretty much, to a large extent, cancelled out when everybody does the same. And indeed, theoretically as well as empirically, this is the thing that makes it more likely that each individual economy will be wage-led, even if, in isolation, a very small economy would be more likely to be profit-led. So here is one other nice puzzle, if you like. And the other thing I keep telling to these people in the European audiences in particular, Europe is the main beneficiary of a coordinated upward high road labor policy route. So if this is the case, then it should be the cheerleader of that in the international arenas. And of course, it's potentially a policy leader. It's also a large power. And of course, particularly speaking to audiences in Britain, I tend to remind them of what they could have, achieve, what they achieved with G20 in 2008, when we were almost facing another Great Depression. And with some coordinated action, they managed to push for at least to turn the Great Depression possibility to just a Great Recession. And of course, then they managed to coordinate again, and it was the age of austerity all of a sudden. So they can coordinate bad policies. If need be, in the event of an extreme emergency, they managed to coordinate also some good emergency policies. Hence, they can also do it again. Now, from here, the labor unions who go to the G20 meetings asked me in 2014 to do a simulation for them, particularly because of obviously labor unions are happy to see that the economies or the world as a whole are wage-led, particularly if they're international unions. They can look at the big picture as opposed to being too worried about their individual small provincial country. So they have a platform called Labor 20. That's the coordinated platform of International Trade Union Confederation and other international labor institutions such as the Trade Union Advisory Committee to the OECD and so on. But we have all come also to the conclusion out of this wage-led recovery research, the impact of a stimulus to equality, a rising wage share on growth seems to be positive in aggregate, but the total effect is not very big. Mind you, if I were to reverse 3 decades of falling labor share in a coordinated fashion across the G20, I got 3% more GDP. That's a one-off thing. It's not bad, it's 3%, but after all, it's not a major stimulus. We are reversing the fall in the wage share in the EU by some 10% and so on. So what else we need to do? We need to combine all elements of policy. And this is what we tried to do in this simulation exercise, trying to combine a coordinated wage policy that would increase the wage share in each G20 country in the next 5 years by up to 5 percentage points of national income. In some countries which are very small or very export-oriented, such as China, the area of maneuver we allowed for was a bit smaller, so they would be able to increase their wage share by 3 percentage points of GDP or 1 percentage point of GDP. Large economies of Europe, like Germany, France, or the US, could increase it by about 5 percentage points in 5 years. And we said combine this with a public investment stimulus, very modest. Every year, public investment stimulus of 1% of each G20 country's GDP. Overall, the total impact was quite impressive. We could get 4 to 5.8% more growth in G20 in 5 years. There is a range there. The difference is because of the different multipliers that we use for simulating our public investment impact. So one set of multipliers came from the research we have done with Yorgos Galanis. Another set of multipliers, it's also a range of multipliers, came from the work that is being done by Sebastian Gehert of the IMK, one of the organizers of this conference, who is also here. And then we also took more modest multipliers that are coming from the IMF research, the new research where they challenged Osborne's and the likes by saying actually multipliers are positive and they're not very small. So overall, we have a range of quite decent growth impact. If you do just wage-led policies, wage-led recovery would give you about 1.9% more growth. Not bad, but not too high. This is the impact of a 5-year-long differentiated in cumulative 1 to 5 percentage point increase in the wage share policy. Only public investment gives you about 1.9 to 3.9% more growth. And of course, the combination is quite powerful. That was presented to the labor ministers of G20. as you know, the impact has been zero. But at least I'm optimistic that the labor unions now understand. They still ask me, will that not cause inflation? And we dutifully calculated the inflationary impact of that, at least for the Europe. And Thomas Hobbes can tell you the results. But what we find is overall, if they do as we tell them, ECB will be able to hit its inflation target, because actually without this sort of wage push, we are facing deflation, as Mark has shown you very neatly the numbers, or depressing the numbers. Now, all this research still, I think, is very premature in the sense that public investment and wage policies are now add-on. And what we really want to do is to look into the genuine interaction between private investment and public investment, because public investment is not just providing a demand stimulus to private investment. That's surely in our models as it stands now, but it's more than that. It is also providing infrastructure, and most likely, if we have a proper demand-led growth model with the government integrated in it, we will have even stronger impact. Now, the last point of the story I want to make, quite well on time, is the interaction between financialization, distribution, accumulation of capital, and productivity. So again, one very prominent research topic of this group has shown the missing link between profits and investment. Just yesterday, Robert Blicker has shown us the case for the US. We have been looking at the impact of financial activities of non-financial corporations on their private investment for the EU 15 countries. And in just the previous session, Daniele Torri and I have had another paper where we showed actually not just the financial payments of the non-financial corporations in the form of increased dividends to satisfy their shareholders and interest payments to the rentier, but also their increased financial revenues from their financial activities, buying the shares of others, other companies, buying government securities, is suppressing, is crowding out private investment. This is very much in line with also the previous work of Özgür Orhan Gazi, who is conveniently also sitting in the audience here for the US, or Tilfan Trek or Engelbert Stockhammer, using more macro data. Now, so this is the financialization to accumulation link. And there is also the distribution and financialization link. Financialization is leading to more equality, lower labor share. And of course, this lower labor share is coming back and hitting investment once more, because increasing profits alone is not enough to lead to higher private investment. What we find in our investment estimations, be it at the firm level or at the macro level, investment is very sensitive to increase in demand. So actually, if we look at the total impact coming from increasing profitability but suppressed demand and aggregate that, investment seems to be wage-led in 8 out of 15 European countries. And there are 7 others where it's profit-led, but you can see the picture. So no surprise, we are also talking about a slowdown in productivity, and of course, we don't have much hopes about potential growth. So what do we do with that? Now, the take-home is we need to mobilize all tools of economic policy. And our aim shouldn't be about balancing the books. That is an outcome of policy. Our aim is economic activity. To be precise, it is full employment, along with taking care of ecological sustainability and taking care of inequalities, and that's in plural. So the way to go is to avoid beggar-thy-neighbor policies, to find ways of coordinating wage policies as part of macroeconomic policy coordination, and of course Europe provides us an area of maneuver for that. Now, to be able to reverse this beggar-thy-neighbor policies, to be able to reverse fall in wage share and to put them in line with productivity again, we need policies that will target not just the bottom, but also the middle and the top of the income distribution. That means we will need pre-distributive policies, redistributive policies, as well as the bigger macro policy dimension. At a pre-distributive policy level, it's not rocket science, but we need to implement policies that will increase the bargaining power of labor. This is about regulating the labor market. This is about improving the union legislation and increasing the coverage of collective bargaining. And we have just very recently completed a research just for the UK. The numbers are astonishing. If the UK could go back in terms of its union density to the levels of union organizing levels of the 1980s, which was where half of the labor force was in the unions, as opposed to the 25% of the labor force in the unions today. If we could reverse that, that's giving us a one-off, but about £400 more national income per person. Not bad, I'm tempted to say. And they're just trying to change the trade union bill yet again in Britain. Sadly not in the direction I'm talking about, but at least some MPs has read that and tried to make an argument in the House of Commons. So how else can we increase the wage share? We are often said wage share can't be a target. Well, yes, but nominal wages can. And if you properly take the equal pay legislation serious and close the gender wage gaps, it will also take you quite a while. Increasing the minimum wages to living wage levels at a statutory regulated minimum wage status would get you quite a while. And of course, we have to target the top pay. We have to think of enforcing pay ratios to cap high pay. And then it's about redistribution. We should think about significantly more progressive taxes on not just income, but also wealth. And in an earlier paper by Thomas Goda and Engelbert Stockhammer, what we have promoted was a median-linked taxation of high incomes and wealth holdings. So one example is the higher marginal top income tax rate could be 70% for income about 10 times the median income. Is it extreme? Well, not if we look back to the late 70s in the UK or the US. Now, the macro context is very important for both demand management, but also for distribution, for getting distribution right. So again, not rocket science. We know how to do that. We have to bring back the welfare state back. We have to reverse financialization and regulate finance. Now, this is all having impact on both demand and distribution, but as I said, we need a policy mix. It's about public investment. Private investment alone will not suffice. Particularly, it will be too little, too late, even when financial regulation and more equality may help private investment. If you want to target not just full employment, but also equalities and ecological sustainability, you need a major public investment boost in not just, however, physical infrastructure, but also in social infrastructure. Whenever we talk about budget balances, we need to think that spending in health, education, and care, social care, care of the children, care of elderly, is investment in the future of our economies. That's capital spending. That's not current spending. Why is that very important? Feminist economists call that purple investment. It's purple because, of course, it's creating jobs in sectors which are predominantly occupied by women at the moment. It is purple because, of course, it's also socializing care, which is at the moment taken care of by the invisible labor of women who are unpaid. So this domestic invisible female employment that makes it feasible for all our male colleagues to entertain other productive activities. But this invisible care is productive. It just has to be socialized. So public investment in this area is one thing that needs to be targeted. This has growth effects, that is equality effects. It creates more gender equality. But theoretically, there was a paper by Eurydice Fotopoulou in another session which proves that it even increases the stimulus to the economy if the economy is wage-led, and I argue it is. So a gender equality wage-led growth model is possible and is a better idea than what we are doing at the moment. Now, Of course, these jobs have to be decent jobs with decent pay. And this is also one other important thing to see. Purple and green would be complementary because these investments are also very labor intensive. You can get a lot of employment with a lot less growth in GDP. So on top of that, we need to talk about shortening the working time. But I'll conclude by saying, if we want recovery and sustainability, we need green and purple public jobs for both women and men with a pay rise, please.